Okay, we will go ahead and get started and see if anybody else signs on. So this week is full steam ahead. So we're going to be doing a bunch of different activities and stuff. And today we will start off with a PowerPoint. So let's get the PowerPoint going. Okay, so what does the S in STEAM stand for? Does anybody know what the S in STEAM stands for?
Science.
Science. So every day this week, we'll focus on a different letter out of the word STEAM. So today, we're obviously going to focus on science. So the S stands for science. So, like I said, today we'll be focusing on the science part of it. The first thing I think of when I think of STEAM and S, though, is I think of space. So we are going to look at the people who explore space. So we're going to look at an astronaut. So we're going to watch this little YouTube video quick on astronauts. There we go.
Monster Math presents Counting to 10. Okay, class, let's count these munchkins together.
I can't see it.
You can't see it?
Me either.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's see. Let's stop share. Let's try this again. Okay. Can you guys see it now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, good.
My job is pretty great. I get to learn about amazing animals and places and do fun experiments with all of you. And you know another job that seems really great? You might even say it's out of this world, being an astronaut. Astronauts are people who travel and work in space. Going to space seems like a big adventure, and it is, but that's not why astronauts go to space. At least, it's not the main reason. Astronauts go to space so they can learn more about what's beyond our planet. They spend weeks, months, or even a whole year away from their friends and family to study space in person. Then,
Do you guys think you could do that? Spend weeks, months, even years away from your whole family just to study space? I don't think so. I don't think I could do it either.
And share their new knowledge with all of us. Do you want to go to space? If you do, maybe you want to know exactly what it takes to be an astronaut and what they do up there all day before you sign up. Let's find out what it takes to be an astronaut. The fact is, practically anybody can become an astronaut. You don't even have to be a certain age. You just have to have a few main things under your belt. For one thing, you have to have studied science in college, which means you pretty much have to be a grown-up or a young adult. You also have to have spent some time, specifically 3 years, actually doing the science that you've studied. That's because most astronauts are actually scientists, and there are all kinds of scientists who work in space, some of which we've talked about before, like biologists or astronomers or chemists. Finally, to be an astronaut, you have to go through a special physical checkup because living in space where you're always floating around in low gravity and in a crowded spacecraft can be really hard on your body. So everyone wants to make sure you're healthy enough to do it. But that's about it. Thousands of people sign up to become astronauts, but only a very few are actually chosen to go on a mission. After years of training, those lucky few finally get sent to space, where they have some really important jobs to do. What kind of jobs are there? Well, some astronauts are pilots. Their job is to get the spacecraft where it needs to go safely. They're also in charge of getting the craft back to Earth. Astronauts that aren't pilots are called mission specialists, and they perform a lot of different jobs. One of those jobs is to work with the pilots to keep the spacecraft and equipment working. This means they inspect the spacecraft and its different parts every day to make sure everything is doing just what it's supposed to do. Another job for mission specialists is doing experiments, where scientists try different things to see what happens. Many of those experiments are done in the International Space Station, or ISS. The ISS is in orbit around the Earth and was built for astronauts to work and live in for long periods of time. Some of the experiments that have been done on the space station have been things like growing zucchinis to see how vegetables grow in space. Other scientists have looked at how different animals like flies or even squids get used to life in space. Another important job astronauts do is to help launch satellites. These are machines that fly in orbit around the Earth, and they can do all sorts of things, like take pictures of the Earth, or help us know what the weather is going to be like, or send signals for television and radio. Now, most of the time, astronauts do their jobs inside the space station or their spacecraft, but for some jobs, astronauts have to suit up and go for a spacewalk. A spacewalk is when an astronaut leaves the spacecraft to do their job outside in space, and it's one of the toughest jobs that astronauts do. Astronauts do spacewalks when they need to fix or build something on the outside of the spacecraft, and to do that, they have to wear special spacesuits. There's no air in space, and it's really, really cold. So these special suits protect the astronauts from the cold and give them air to breathe. They're also protected by being tethered or tied to the spacecraft by a long cable that keeps them from floating away. Being an astronaut sounds like hard work, but you get to see our planet from space and conduct awesome experiments and work on cool technology every day and even go for spacewalks. So what do you think? Do you want to be an astronaut? Keep learning as much as you can about space and science, and who knows, one day it might be you up there. And let us help you get.
So that is all about astronauts. Would either one of you ever want to be an astronaut? No? Okay. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. Okay. So, come on, go to the next page. Okay, so, hold on, we're going to go back a second. Hope you didn't read that. So, when do you think was the first time anybody ever even thought about going to space? What year? Or how long ago do you think?
$50 years ago?
Okay. So, the first time anyone explored space was in 1957. So, it's about 70-ish years ago. Because let's see, we're in 2020, right? And they went in 1957, which means
63 years ago?
Yep, 63 years ago was the first time anybody even kind of thought about exploring space. And so the first thing that happened was the Soviets, which is over in Russia, they launched the first artificial satellite called Sputnik 1, and they launched that into space. So they didn't even send anybody to space yet. They just launched a satellite into space. And then 4 years later, in 1961, the first person, he was Russian, his name was Yuri Gagarin, he became the first person to actually orbit the Earth. Okay, then, so who do you guys know who the most famous astronaut is? Who most people, when they think of astronauts, they think of this one person?
Not me. That sounds like a lot of.
Okay. The person most people contribute to being an astronaut is Neil Armstrong, because he was the first man to actually step foot on the moon. And he spoke the phrase, "The eagle has landed." And he's also one that said, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." And he was the first man to walk on the moon. So, that's all about what I have for astronauts. And then I wanted to show you guys a website. So, Let's see. Let me share my screen again. We'll go to this page. It'll work. Okay. So this is the NASA website. So you can go here and you can learn just about anything you want about space. These are just some photos that are in their photo gallery of pictures they've taken from space. Look at all these beautiful pictures. And then if you're really interested in space and what they're doing, you can even look at their missions for all the stuff they have coming up. So if you look at, like, here, we'll just click on the first one, this Artemis program. This is a really cool picture. They are planning to land the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024. So in 4 years, they want to put 2 more people on the moon. And then, so if you read it, it says, using innovative technologies to explore more of the lunar surface than ever before, we will cooperate with our commercial and international partners to establish sustainable exploration by the end of the decade. Then we will use what we learn on and around the moon to take the next giant leap, sending astronauts to Mars. So after they do this, in 4 years, they want to send these 2 people to the moon to learn more about the moon and explore the moon. And then after that, they want to try and start working on sending people to Mars. That seems like a pretty big dream to have, but it's a good dream to have, sending people to Mars. But so if you go on NASA's website, and I know it's one of the links in your guys' page for this week, there are all these different things you can look at for if you want to learn more about NASA and stuff. And there's even STEAM engagement. So there's all these activities you guys can do with your families or on your own when you're on the NASA website, of stuff you can do that's STEAM related.
Mars is the closest planet to the sun.
No, that would be Mercury. So if you remember your planets, it goes Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars. So Mars is the next planet after us, so it's behind our moon. So that's why they want to go to our moon first and then go to Mars. And I know I worked a lot at JCAC over the last school year as a sub and stuff, as a para. And I know in one of the science classes, I watched the science class, they measured how far it is from each planet with toilet paper rolls, like squares of toilet paper, and they measured how far all the planets were from, like, where the sun is compared to where all the planets are and how close they are to each other. Do you remember that? Yeah. So that was fun. But when it comes to, let's stop sharing for a second. But when it comes to STEAM, like I said, the S is for science. So that's a lot of stuff. I mean, we've even done a lot of that science stuff just throughout the weeks here. If you watched the day I did the elephant toothpaste, that was a science experiment. Some of the stuff we did last week, the bubbles, and that would be considered science because you're creating things and all that. And today, I know you guys received materials to make salt crystals at home. So if you have those materials and you want to make your salt crystal, I'm going to show you guys that video, and we can make our salt crystals with the video. Let's see. These things. This on. Okay. Make sure if you can't see the video, you guys tell me, okay? Here is how to make your salt crystals if you have your supplies. So that is one of those projects that when you do it, you'd want to watch it for like several weeks at a time and see how all of that stuff changes. Was that pretty cool?
Can you actually eat that, like, after you make it?
I would say no. I would not think it's safe to eat, especially if it's been sitting there for several weeks. I would guess that's probably not a good option. But yeah. And there are lots of science activities you guys can do. If you've ever done a sink or float science experiment where you get a tub of water and you take just items you find around your house like pennies or a pen or a paperclip and stuff, and you put it and you make the hypothesis. And that's all that science really is making a hypothesis. So if you're familiar with the scientific method, most things is when you're doing scientific method, it's just a step-by-step process to see how things are different around our world. So step one would be you ask a question and find a problem that you want to solve. And that's what you do first. And then after that, you study and observe and research. So if you pick your problem and then you take some time and you study your problem, you observe it, you do research on it, you do all this stuff, and then you form your hypothesis, which is your educated guess. So like if we would have seen, before we've seen that, you could guess. What did you think the salt would have done? Did you think it would form like that? You kind of set your guesses, or like with the sink or float activity I was telling you about, you pick your object and you're like, oh, I think this apple's gonna sink. I think this pen will float. And you just kind of make a hypothesis and see what will happen. Then you design your experiment and you test it. So then after you've formed your hypothesis, you find a way to then create your science experiment, and then you test what you think is going to happen. And then after that, you have to analyze your data, of course, make sure you have everything written down, you got all your results, you know exactly what happened and how it worked and everything. And then at the end of it, you draw your conclusion, you find out if you were right about your hypothesis, and if you weren't, you can start over, do the project again and think of a different hypothesis and see what happens. Science is a lot about guessing and just watching and seeing what happens. So do you guys have any questions today about science type things with STEAM? No? Okay. Well, so that's it for today with science. Tomorrow we will work on the T. I'm not going to tell you what that is today because that'll be the first question tomorrow, is what does the T stand for in STEAM? So I hope to see you guys tomorrow. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your afternoon.
Bye.
Bye.